the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. I want to start a new segment in the podcast. We're all familiar with the superstar pastors. We're all familiar with names like Mark Batterson, Andy Stanley, Craig Rochelle. And I think that all of those great pastors bring a lot to the table that we can all learn from and we can all glean from in our own ministries as well as in our own personal lives. However, at the same time, I think there are thousands of pastors around the country who are doing great things, who are amazing leaders and pastors in their own right that we can learn from, and we can pull great things for our own personal lives as well as in our ministries. And so what I wanted to do is I want to start a new segment in this episode where we are talking to pastors around the country who are doing great things, who are advancing the kingdom of God, who are coming up with innovative ideas on how to do stuff that we can learn from. They're not going to be, most of them are not going to be pastors you've ever heard of or familiar with, but they're pastors who are really doing some things that we can learn from. And so that's going to be a new segment that we're going to start in this episode. And so for our first guest, we're going to have the lead pastor, church planter, Allen Kendrick from Vivid Church, joining us today. So Allen, welcome to the Ministry Hacker Podcast.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm excited to be here with everybody. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely, man. Now you're a part of the Ministry Hacker community. And so you just launched Vivid Church on September 20th, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Right. Yep. And so I'm sure it was super exciting. We're going to get into the launch, but before we do that, I want you to just kind of talk everybody through, how did you feel the call to church planting? What's your ministry experience been like leading up to that? Just kind of give everybody a little bit of background on your journey into church planting.
Well, you and I have talked a lot about this, and you know more than anybody, I never wanted to plant a church. It wasn't in my wavelength, and the long story gets pretty short, but in January of 2019, I went to a monastery for 4 days of solitude and silence, and I could talk about that the whole podcast, but the one takeaway that we need to know is from that stay there, I felt like the Lord had put it on my heart and said, it's time to move back to the South and plant a church. Now, at that point, I was the young adult pastor at Visalia First Assembly of God in Visalia, California, and we had been there for 4 years. And we started that ministry from the ground up. So that was January of 2019 when I felt that. And we just drafted 10 cities on a list in the Southeast to try to figure out where in the South is the Lord asking us to go.
Now you're from the South, right?
Originally born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah. So the idea was to try to get, closer to family if we were going to do this and church plant and have more babies, which was prophetic because we had another girl 6 months ago in the middle of all this mess. But to back up, we moved in June of 2019 to Columbia. We flew to different cities and prayed over the cities. And I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to feel or see or know. I gathered data points from full insight reports that show you demographics. They show you trends of suburbs and urban communities and all of that. But when we drove through Columbia, the best I could tell you is it felt like home, and I felt like the Lord was asking us to move there. We didn't have a friend in the community. We didn't have a family member in the region. We simply just felt that assignment from God, much like Paul in the book of Acts says, now compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem. It didn't make sense. A lot of people told him not to, and he did it anyway. And all that to say, that's how we decided Columbia was the place. Moved in June of 2019 and had a 15-month ramp to launch Sunday, which was September 20th of this year.
Crazy. Crazy. And so
Yeah.
tell us then just a little bit about the church itself. So the name of the church is Vivid Church. What's the mission behind Vivid, the name and all of that?
So the entire idea is boiling it down to the most simple thing that I think I can focus on. And the whole thing is hinged on your story. That's it. I believe that every person's story gets better when Jesus gets involved.
Right.
Simply and truly, and I think you agree, and the people in our community would say the same thing. And that is really the gospel at its core, that we have free will to allow Jesus to intersect into our story at any point that we would want. So the vision for the church is simply this: we exist to lead people into the vivid story that God has for them.
Right.
Now that comes from 2 Peter 1:16, because Peter in his late 60s looks back on his whole life, writing his last book and reminiscing about the stories, his own story that he had with Jesus. It forces him to write a particular verse that we base the whole church off of. And the reason he's writing it is because some people had a hard time believing the stories he was telling. And he says, "For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." That always leapt out at me, because he's saying the stories, we did not make them up.
Right.
We simply said yes to Jesus, and our story got this amazing, this, what I would say, vivid. It's got the right plot twist. God can write a better beginning, middle, and end for any of us when we allow him to write the story. And so theologically, we don't have to go too far into this, but I think maybe the only thing that we will carry into heaven with us is the story that we tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
We
good.
better make it a good one.
Right.
We better make it a good one. So my job now is to make sure that every story that makes it to heaven is vivid. And so that's the kind of idea behind the church plant.
Nice, man. That's awesome. So, okay. So take us into launch week, I guess, because it's not just one day, it's
Right.
a whole week of activity. So kind of take us through kind of how the launch went, what the week looked like, and, you know, maybe some of the challenges and some of the victories that you had through the course of the week.
Yeah. Can I back it up to June? I think June is a critical portion. Okay.
Yeah.
So in June, we were getting ready to go. Most church plants are portable, so you're set up and tear down every Sunday. We were in a school. Now, we had never actually been in the school, but we had a contract saying we could be in the school. Well, due to COVID, we lost that because most school districts nationwide started cutting all their outside agreements. So she said, "Hey, man, the school district, they're going to pull the plug on this. And whether they've told you that or not, I'm telling you, you're not going to meet in this school. It's over." Mm-hmm. So we started looking for a new facility. And what I realized is that my movie theaters weren't open yet and wouldn't be open till mid-September or October, much less rent to me. And then our performing arts centers weren't open just yet. And we were in the same scenario. Well, because of the timeline for purchasing equipment and figuring all that out, everything was backed up in China anyway. So we had to find something just to get us to a September launch. So I started to go into commercial real estate, and long story short, found a great space, 3,022 square feet, and it had never been occupied before. Wow. All it was a concrete slab, a roof, and walls. It had no HVAC, no electrical, no plumbing. It had nothing, no drywall or insulation. So we signed that building, a lease agreement for 1 year on August 10th. So that put us at best. We had 40 days at best. That's all we had to work with. And we turned an 8-week job into a 3-week job. So when you talk about what the week looked like, you know, Monday going into launch week, we started work in there, and my team put in Monday through Friday, we put in 600 man hours of labor. We learned how to lay carpet. We learned how to install baseboards. We learned how to run spray guns and run floor buffers. And we did all of that ourselves between the hours of 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. So that's before we even hit the weekend itself.
Right.
We had all of that energy pouring out. The very last day that we could receive our occupancy certificate, Friday, 2 days before launch, the inspector comes in at 3:00 and we get our OC. They close at 4. So, I mean, everything was last minute on this. And we had our very first rehearsal service in there at 8:00 Friday night.
Yeah.
And the very first service was Saturday at 5:00. So less than 24 hours later, this whole thing had to come together.
Man.
Our LED wall left Los Angeles at 8 a.m. Thursday morning. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina. So that's coast to coast.
Right.
And we had 2 dudes on a truck who drove straight all the way through. It rolled in Saturday morning at 10 a.m. and they got on a lift and they started hoisting that thing up. And we used that on Saturday night at 5:00. I mean, when I say like this whole thing was last minute, man, I mean, it was a series of miracles, one after the next. So by the time we made it to launch Sunday, we had 4 services, one on Saturday night with friends and family from all over the country, and 3 on Sunday morning. Across all 4 of those services, we had 363 people.
Wow.
We had 6 salvations, so 6 brand new yeses for the Lord, which was so cool to see because that's what it was all about. That's why we got into it. And then we had 20 connect cards filled out for people to join the church in some capacity. So they'll be attending what our membership will look like and all of that in the weeks to come. So
crazy.
That's a crash course of what it looked like, at least.
Dude, well, and it's amazing just to see, God through the whole thing, even, going all the way back to the monastery and just watching him every step of the way, even as we hit March and, COVID and shutdown and all the building issues and, finding a building and then all the material. And I remember watching, seeing pictures and videos all in the week leading up to it and, everything in the prep. And then, every morning I would wake up and I would see new pictures about what had happened the day before. And, just kind of watching it all come together from a distance and seeing God, opening the right doors and leading you guys through, every step of the way to the point where, Saturday looked great. I mean, at least again, from this side of things, the videos and the pictures and the services and everything looked like they went well. And, and I'm sure, you being in the middle of it, not everything went as planned, but, I would say overall a successful launch date, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not Instagram, it's Insta-Lie. So just remember, it's polished to look the best that we can make it look.
Nice. Okay. So talk to us about church planting. Cause like you said, church planting and even being a lead pastor was really not something you had on your radar at all. And so talk to us about how did the journey of becoming a church planter and in launching the church, how has that changed you as a pastor?
I mean, in every way, in absolutely every single way. I now understand the responsibility, the weight that every decision you make, it has massive implications.
Right.
And so I've read a book called High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. Mm-hmm. And he's done a lot of coaching with high performance people. And he says that the CEO of an organization mentally spends the same exact amount of energy that an NFL quarterback spends on their job.
Yep. And
we don't think about it in those terms because these guys are famous, Tom Brady and all the other guys, Drew Brees, that we look at. But when you set them side by side, he said the calories burned are the same.
Yep.
And there is a real, just being transparent with whoever's watching it, there's a real exhaustion with it. There's a real weight to it. Mm-hmm. Every conversation, you see how that conversation, whether that's a positive conversation or a negative conversation that you're about to have, how that's going to ripple around.
Yep.
Every decision you make, from a policy to personnel, how that's going to change and affect, and you're literally going to mold something out of it. Mm-hmm. So when you're on a church staff, you just look at whoever the guy is and you're like, well, he's the guy, he'll figure it out, you know?
Right.
And I did that. I did that with my pastor, Pastor Mike Robertson in California. And my days off on Friday, I could really have a day off. I mean, it was very simple. It's not as easy to let your mind be free on your off day, because we're in ministry, we're in the people business.
Yep.
The work is not, it's line by line, precept by precept. I mean, there's no end in sight, really.
Right.
So it's a lot harder to shut it all down. So how has it changed and morphed me? I mean, it's added so many skills that I didn't know that I would need in terms of leadership, fundraising, team building, all the construction stuff. I know how to run a floor buffer now.
Skills you never thought you need in ministry.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, there's no class on church planting, and there's not a class on church planting in a global pandemic. So there's just a lot that we've had to literally just grit it out. There's no playbook. There's no manual. I'm partnering with 3 church planting organizations: Church Multiplication Network, ARC, which is Association of Related Churches, and Stadia. All 3 called somewhere in March or April and said, everything we taught you, you're just going to need to put it on pause.
Yep.
And you're going to help us teach people how to plant a church.
Yep.
And this was before we had launched, you know. So when in that monastery, I don't tell people this often because, you know, I don't want them to think I'm hokey or weird, but I'm still in the business of believing that the Lord speaks to us directly with specific words.
Yeah.
And at the monastery, I said, okay, Lord, who am I to you? What is my purpose? You know, and as I'm walking along this trail at this monastery, I felt like he said, you're my pioneer. You're my Lewis and Clark. And I was on a paved path, and I thought, I'm making up God's voice. And I just felt a real halt to stop and look around. And there up the mountainside right beside me to the right was a path that I had cut myself that took me to the top of the mountain where the monks lived and the kitchen was. And you had to go there every day to get your meal. And so I'm standing on a paved road in front of me. And as soon as the Lord had said, you're my Lewis and Clark, I had passed by the path I had cut myself in the bushes and in the all that. And so it was like the Lord said, no, that's who you are, is that. Yeah. So I didn't really realize, I mean, church planting is already a pioneering adventure like Lewis and Clark, but he really meant that because he knew that 2020 was on the way. Yeah. And we have had to Lewis and Clark our way through it. They didn't have a map. Right. I didn't realize the map that I had wouldn't be useful anymore. We did not have a map for this. You're not supposed to launch in a lease agreement space. That's against the rules. Right. You're supposed to launch large. You know, there's all these different things, and we didn't do any of them. I mean, you're not supposed to meet with your team weekly. We started meeting weekly in May, you know? And so all the things, I think that what I've learned, and I don't want it to be over spiritualized, but it has to be in some way, you got to do what the Lord is asking you to do. Right. That's the crux. Yep. And come all of hell and high water or both, you just have to go for that. And so that's what we did to the best we could with the information we had to make decisions that I had to make. And I think that's where we are today, still doing that. Right.
Well, and I think that's something that all of us, I think in the midst of COVID and pandemic, I think that's what we're learning is we've almost gotten too comfortable with our maps. We've gotten too comfortable with knowing what the steps are. And, we do this, we get that result. Like we've become so comfortable with that it's moved us out of the faith realm. It's moved us out of thinking about, okay, well, I know that this is what normally happens, but God's moving me in this direction. And so I'm just going to go with God and trust in where he's taking me. And I think that a lot of pastors and ministry leaders, we're kind of being pushed to go back to that, I'm going to step off the map because we already are. I'm going to stop fighting to get back on the map or get back to normal. And I'm just going to pave the way and say, okay, you show me how, God, and I will follow you into the bush. And so yeah, I mean, obviously from this end, watching everything you've gone through in the last 6-8 months, and watching you just kind of figure it out. And that's really what, you know, as leaders, that's what we should be. We should be figuring things out all the time. Even pandemic aside, we should be coming up with innovative ways to do things. We should be, you know, taking new territory. We should be coming up with new ways and new, you know, paths. And we should be that adventurous, you know, explorer. And I think too often, you know, in ministry, we kind of settle into whatever's comfortable, whatever works, and whatever we're familiar with. And I think that, you know, in some ways that has led to some of the ineffectiveness of the church, you know, nationwide. So it's just cool to hear kind of your process. So, okay. So a little vulnerability time. What mistakes did you make along the way that now that you're on this side, looking back, you're like, I probably should have done that differently. Is there anything that comes to mind that you just kind of wish you could have a do-over?
Two things specifically. One, in March, April, May, I had some friends of mine that utilized technology better than I did, and they would do FaceTime video calls with people they'd never met yet. Okay, and they did these in the droves. So they would do like DoorDash dinner dates. So I somehow reach out to you through Facebook, leverage the platform. If you like a post I post, or you comment on a post I post, I go into your DMs and ask you to have a FaceTime, as awkward as that may be because we've never met.
Right.
That's what they did. And the planter would order DoorDash, have it sent to that person's house, and have a date night like I would have in real time at a restaurant.
Right.
And I saw some guys do this, and I think that we could have met more people if I would have done that. We had a baby March 17th, and so we had a newborn in the house that we were, you know, nurturing at that point. But I do think that the guys who did that I've seen launch over the last 2 weeks, September 13th and 20th, those are the first two kind of times in the calendar year where churches have been launching. I think that they probably reap some benefits, one on their launch team, and two in their church attendance those weekends, right, that we probably missed out on because I just thought, there's just no way that's going to work.
Right. Yeah.
So I think I did 2 or 3, you know, I just did a handful. And then 2 is this, because I changed the model. We went to 100 seats in our lease agreement. That's it. There's 100 seats on the floor. So we registered 60 people per service, and we had those 3 services. Well, we should have registered more because I didn't account for the attrition. You have 20 to 30% of people who are going to fall off the wagon. And even if they register, 20 to 30% aren't even going to show up.
Right.
So we lost out on both people because we marketed really well. And what I mean by that is we said, the service is full, it's sold out, it's registered up. Well, that meant that 60 people had registered, and there was an additional 40 spots that we thought people would randomly show up in person. We pushed them away with our marketing, and then we lost 20 to 30% of those that came. So I lost both people, and I think we could have seen more people show up on launch Sunday. Mm-hmm. But we didn't know how it was all going to work in terms of registrations and the world we live in right now. So I think that was a miss a little bit, but those are good news. Those are fixable problems. Right. We can adjust. Yep. We can adjust to that.
Yep. Well, and most likely anybody who is interested in coming on launch day will probably most likely try again at some other point. And so, you know, so even though maybe, it's a bit of a miss on the launch day, in the end, you're probably going to get them at some point just visiting. So
yeah,
that's interesting. The DoorDash thing is interesting. I think I'm with you. I don't know that I would have embraced. I mean, I'm sure, again, there are probably benefits for others, but that seemed a little awkward. At least for me, I would be a little iffy on that.
Yeah. And you know me, I'm extroverted and all that. And that still was a leap. I mean, that was quite a leap because I was like, I just don't know what the ROI is on this, man. So I don't know.
Just waving. Hi.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the couple mistakes you made. What are a couple ministry hacks that you learned along the way, other than learning how to use a buffer machine? what is something that you learned along the way that you were like, when you learned it, you were like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I wish I'd have learned it before, or I wish I'd have known that when I was a young adult pastor. Like, is there anything you learned along the way that was just a huge eye opener?
It's in the technological realm. Same thing. When anyone is liking a post, we treat it just as like a number. That is somebody telling you, I'm interested in what you are doing.
Right.
Now, for a local context, what that looks like, and this is where the work comes in, every single post, you pour through all the likes and you go into those profiles and find out if they're local to the community. So if it said Lexington, South Carolina, I would reach out to that person directly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for liking that post.
Yep.
I'm Allen Kendrick. I'm the pastor here. And then I turn that into, the idea is to turn that into a real social interaction. So take social media and make it a social interaction. We did that, and I really think that, well, I know it just worked. I mean, we don't just want social media to be this static, like, oh, cool, we're creating awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It's guerrilla marketing. You want to go deeper than awareness. You want to go through full-on engagement. And when somebody follows you, that's even bigger in their world. If somebody's following you, their real estate for that follow to them is huge.
Yeah.
So they're already saying, not only am I interested, I'm all in. I'm all in with what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
That's too easy. That needs to be a dinner in 48 hours, 72 hours from now. We got to be at the table. Mm-hmm. So we saw a lot of leveraging Facebook and Instagram and any sponsored ads we did. We really tooled it to the community that we were trying to reach.
Right.
And those sponsored ads produced a lot of people on our team who were just naturally looking for a church. So there's guys on the worship team who just, I mean, they're so good. There's guys in guest experience. There's guys in kids that I'm thinking of right now, both women and men who are phenomenal, who came exclusively through this piece of real estate right here.
Yep. Yep.
So I think this is now your evangelism budget. I don't think it's your marketing budget. I think that that's the way it's got to be seen. And that's something that we did that was a ministry hack that I'm going, man, if I would have known this when I was a young adult pastor,
yeah,
I mean, exponential growth, I think.
Well, and that's something that any pastor can do right now. You know, they can go into their social media feeds. They can find who's liking their posts. They can look at those profiles, find out, you know, are they local? And if they're local, don't just leave it as a like on a post. Really reach out, really connect with those real people. Because, yeah, that's something that we can all do right now. And like you said, just see ultimate results right away. And so, okay, so we have just a few more minutes. You've launched. The train is on the track. It's moving. You're trying to keep up. What's the next big thing for you? What's the next hurdle or the next challenge, you know, moving into the fall months? What are you now turning your sights towards?
So now the big thing is retaining, and which is ultimately growth. But what that looks like for us, we're going all in on what we call the culture course. So I wanted the onus to be on the people who want to serve and want to be involved and be a member. So here's my whole language. I'm asking people to attend our culture course that I teach, where they will receive a culture guide. Yep. That guide has 9 culture points that I've come up with that I want inside of our church. It also covers just the foundations of Christianity, and it covers all sorts of kind of nuances of how we approach ministry and the philosophy we have. Right. Once that person has completed the culture course and the guide, then they become a part of the culture crew. Yeah. That's how we call our volunteers, because I want the onus to be on them so I can look at them and say, you are carrying the culture of Vivid. So when you show up, every action you do, you are the culture. And you've gone through our course, you've received the guide, you're on the crew. And so now it's up to you to take this culture that we're trying so hard to instill in us and now replicate it, own it. That's what we're focusing on, because I think, you know, from just a brand perspective of our church and how we want to treat people. Every church is going to do one thing: more and better disciples. I think that's the point behind the scenes. I think that's the phrase as quickly as I can say it: more and better disciples. We want more, so people coming to know Jesus, and then those that we have, want them to be better disciples tomorrow than they are today. More and better disciples. But every church has its own flavor, its own unique flair. That culture is extremely important to me. I'm protecting that at all costs right now, tailoring it, tooling it, and making it happen. That's what the fall is going to be, is adding people to it and then pushing the culture into them so that they can carry it out.
Right. Yeah. Good, man. And I think that's so huge. I mean, every church's focus should be discipleship. And so creating a culture around that, around not just, learning to be like Jesus, but learning how to serve others just as he did. And so, well, man, Allen, I'm so excited for Vivid. I'm so excited for you and for Amanda and just everything that is going on there. And so, so thank you so much for being a part of the Ministry Hacker podcast on this episode. And we are praying for you, man. We're praying for everything that's going on there, everything that you're doing. And so for everyone listening, you can check out Vivid Church at vivid.com. Is that correct, Allen? Vivid.com?
Vividchurch.com.
Vividchurch.com. So you can check out vividchurch.com, check them out, see what all they're doing, see what Allen's doing over on his end. And if you have a ministry leader that you are aware of that you feel like everybody should know about, send me a comment, send me an email, just let me know who that is, and we will see if we can work them in to the Ministry Hackers podcast. So thank you all for being here in this episode, and we will see you in the next one.